When most people think of Jewish life in America, they picture New York City, the delis, the synagogues, the Diamond District. And yes, New York is home to over 1 million Jewish residents. But scattered across the United States are towns where Jewish life is not simply present, it is everything. Towns where over 93% of the population is Jewish, where Yiddish is the first language spoken in nearly every home, where the entire local economy shuts down for the Sabbath, and most people, even in America, have never heard of them. These are 10 American towns that feel more Jewish than New York itself. Now, let us begin. Number 10. We start in the east end of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a leafy residential neighborhood called Squirrel Hill. It sits just a few miles from downtown, named likely by early settlers for the black squirrels that once filled its oak trees. In the 1920s, Eastern European Jewish immigrants began moving here in large numbers from Oakland and the Hill District. They never left. By 2010, roughly 40% of Squirrel Hill's residents were Jewish. A study by the United Jewish Federation found that 33% of all Jewish people in Greater Pittsburgh live in this one neighborhood alone. Researchers noted that the stability of Squirrel Hill as a geographic hub of the Jewish community is unique in all of North America. Walk down Murray Avenue on any given morning and you will pass a kosher bakery, a Jewish day school, a yeshiva, a community center, and a mikvah before you have gone 2 blocks. But what truly sets Squirrel Hill apart is something rare in Jewish communities anywhere. Here, Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox families all share the same streets. In many American Jewish communities, the Orthodox segment is culturally and even geographically separated from everyone else. Not in Squirrel Hill. This neighborhood defied that pattern for a century. Then came October 27, 2018. A gunman entered the Tree of Life synagogue during Shabbat morning services and killed 11 people. It was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. 6 others were wounded, including 4 police officers who rushed to the scene. But the community's response showed the world what Squirrel Hill was made of: unity, solidarity, a refusal to be defined by hatred. The neighborhood did not fracture, it drew closer together. By 1970, 45,000 Jews were living in Pittsburgh and contributing to every aspect of life from academia to medicine to public service. And Squirrel Hill remained the beating heart of it all. A neighborhood where 40% of the population is Jewish and every denomination shares the same streets is remarkable. But what about a town where over half the population was once Jewish and thousands of them had survived the Holocaust? Number 9. About 15 miles north of Chicago's downtown sits the suburb of Skokie, Illinois. Its population is around 68,000. It began as a German and Luxembourger farming community called Niles Center. But after the Second World War, everything changed. In the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 1970s, an estimated 8,000 Holocaust survivors settled in Skokie. They made up roughly 10% of the Jewish community. Yiddish could be heard on every other street corner. Synagogues, Hebrew schools, Jewish delis, kosher butchers, and Israeli bakeries defined the character of the town. At its peak in the mid-1960s, nearly 60% of Skokie's population was Jewish. It had the highest per capita concentration of Holocaust survivors anywhere in the United States. Then came 1977, when a neo-Nazi group called the National Socialist Party of America announced plans to march through Skokie. They had chosen this town deliberately. They knew who lived there. The village government refused to grant permission. The case became one of the most agonizing legal battles in American history. The American Civil Liberties Union defended the Nazis' right to march on free speech grounds. One of its lawyers was himself Jewish. Before this crisis, the survivors in Skokie had been a quiet community. They raised families and rarely spoke about what they had endured. But the threat of Nazis marching through their streets ignited something. It brought their stories out of the silence. And from that fire, they built the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. It opened on April 19, 2009, with a keynote speech by President Bill Clinton and with Elie Wiesel in attendance. Today, Jewish residents make up roughly 30% of Skokie's population. The demographics have shifted. But the legacy of those survivors and their refusal to let hatred pass unchallenged remains the defining story of this town. A community that stood against hatred is powerful. But what about a quiet New Jersey suburb that built one of the most complete Orthodox Jewish communities outside of Israel, and hardly anyone noticed? Number 8. Teaneck, New Jersey sits in Bergen County, just 10 minutes from the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan. Population around 39,000. To the untrained eye, it looks like any other well-kept American suburb. Tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, school buses in the morning. But look closer. Teaneck has over 20 synagogues and more than 20 kosher restaurants. That is roughly one synagogue for every 2,000 residents. The Orthodox Union describes it as one of the most dynamic Orthodox communities outside of Israel. Teaneck became the model for modern Orthodox suburban life. These are families fully engaged with the modern world, university educated, working in medicine, law, finance, and technology, but at the same time maintaining strict religious observance. The town has an ERUV, a symbolic boundary that permits observant Jews to carry items outdoors on the Sabbath. There are multiple Jewish day schools, a thriving Sephardic congregation, and a mikvah. What makes Teaneck even more interesting is its broader diversity. The suburb has significant African American, Korean, and Filipino communities. In fact, Teaneck was one of the first communities in America to voluntarily desegregate its schools, back in 1965. Jewish life here does not exist in isolation. It thrives alongside other cultures in a way that few places manage. 20 synagogues in a single New Jersey suburb is quietly extraordinary. But head south to Florida and you will find a city whose Jewish story involves 16 Jewish mayors, signs that once banned Jewish guests from hotels, and a Yiddish nickname that translates roughly as the Little Jewish Town by the Sea. Number 7. Miami Beach, Florida. The famous barrier island across Biscayne Bay from downtown Miami, known worldwide for its Art Deco buildings and white sand beaches. But for decades, this was a place where Jewish people were explicitly unwelcome. In the 1930s, advertisements for some oceanfront hotels openly declared that Jewish guests were not wanted. Signs at some establishments restricted entry to non-Jewish customers only. The anti-Semitism was not subtle. It was printed on the front door. Then, in 1949, Florida's legislature passed a law ending discrimination in real estate and hotels, and the Jewish community bloomed. By the 1970s, nearly 80% of Miami Beach's population was Jewish. The influence was tremendous. Miami Beach had at least 16 Jewish mayors. The city earned the Yiddish nickname shtetl by the sea. A shtetl is the Yiddish word for a small Jewish town in Eastern Europe. The first synagogue was built in 1929. It still stands today as the Jewish Museum of Florida. By 1980, rising prices and shifting demographics began to change the landscape. Many Jewish families moved north to Broward and Palm Beach counties, and the percentage dropped significantly. Yet the cultural memory remains embedded in the architecture, the food, and the institutions. You can still feel it in the streets. Miami Beach was once 80% Jewish, and it still carries that legacy in its bones. But travel up the Long Island Railroad from Manhattan, and within 40 minutes you will arrive in a cluster of towns where Friday afternoon feels like nothing else in America. Number 6. The Five Towns is an informal grouping of villages on the south shore of western Long Island. Lawrence, Cedarhurst, Woodmere, Hewlett, and Inwood. They sit just across the border from the New York City borough of Queens. The total population is around 50,000. An estimated 30,000 of those residents are Jewish. In some areas, the Jewish population reaches as high as 75%. On a Friday afternoon in Cedarhurst, Central Avenue transforms. Bakeries push out fresh challahs as fast as the ovens allow. Kosher butchers and fish shops do the highest volume of the entire week. Grandmothers run into granddaughters on the pavement. Rabbis greet their congregants between errands. The whole mechanism of Jewish communal life shifts into its highest gear as the Sabbath approaches. When Shabbat arrives, Central Avenue falls quiet. Many stores close entirely on Saturday. The Orthodox community, which started with a handful of families in a Cedarhurst storefront back in 1928, grew over the following decades into the dominant institutional presence. They established an eruv, synagogues, yeshivas, and a mikvah. They transformed the commercial heart of these towns so completely that the weekly rhythm of opening and closing is dictated by the Jewish calendar. A cluster of Long Island villages where Jewish life dictates when shops open and close is remarkable. But cross the continent to California and you will find a city whose Jewish community rewrites every stereotype you might have heard. Number 5. Beverly Hills, California. The famously wealthy city within Los Angeles County. Population around 34,000. You think of Rodeo Drive and film stars. But here's the reality most people never hear. Approximately 61% of Beverly Hills residents are Jewish. That makes it the second most Jewish incorporated place per capita in the entire United States. And here is what truly sets it apart. The largest religious community in Beverly Hills is Persian Jewish. Following the Iranian Revolution of 1979, waves of Jewish families fled Iran and settled in Beverly Hills and the nearby Westwood area. The concentration became so significant that locals began calling a section of Westwood Tehrangeles. This is a Jewish world most people in Britain have never encountered. Not the Ashkenazi Eastern European tradition that shaped New York. This is Persian, Iranian, a distinct culture with its own food, its own music, its own traditions of faith and family. An estimated 50,000 Persian Jews live across the broader Los Angeles area. This community has quietly become one of the most significant cultural forces in the city. Jewish history in Los Angeles stretches all the way back to 1841. Before California even became a state. But it is the Persian chapter that makes Beverly Hills unlike anywhere else. A city where Persian Jews transformed one of the most famous addresses in the world is a story few people know. But return to the East Coast, head to southern Florida, and you will find a city where over 70% of the population is Jewish. And it all started with a single family in 1931. Number 4. Boca Raton, Florida, the southernmost city in Palm Beach County. Population approximately 100,000. Known for its beaches, its golf courses, and its gated communities with terracotta roofs stretching to the horizon. An estimated 70.8% of residents identify as Jewish. The city has 16 synagogues and over 40 kosher restaurants, markets, and bakeries. Local organizations describe it as having one of the highest per capita Jewish populations outside of Israel. And this enormous community traces back to a single family who arrived in 1931. What drove this growth was migration. Jewish retirees from the American Northeast, particularly New York and New Jersey, moved south in enormous numbers from the 1970s onward. They brought their synagogues, their delis, their social clubs, their entire way of life. Since the pandemic, the migration has accelerated further, with younger Orthodox families relocating for the warm weather and the fact that Florida charges no state income tax. For British viewers, the comparison writes itself. Just as thousands of British retirees moved to the Costa del Sol or the Algarve each year, American Jewish retirees built Boca Raton into a community of their own. Except here, an entire religious and cultural infrastructure came with them. A sun-drenched Florida city where 70% of the population is Jewish and 40 kosher restaurants line the streets would seem hard to surpass. But travel north to a hamlet in New York's Rockland County and you will enter a world where Yiddish is the primary language and more than 100 synagogues serve a single community. Number 3. Monsey is an unincorporated hamlet within the town of Ramapo, Rockland County. It sits about 30 miles northwest of Midtown Manhattan. It does not appear on most maps as a proper town or village, and it is classified as a census-designated place. But do not let that fool you. Monsey has over 100 synagogues, and according to census data, 41% of residents speak Yiddish at home. Those figures are striking for an American hamlet most people have never heard of. Let those numbers settle for a moment. The community is predominantly Hasidic. Several courts and dynasties are represented. Adjacent to Monsey sit the communities of New Square, which is almost entirely made up of Squirrel Hasidim, and Kasser, which is almost entirely Vishnitz Hasidim. Together, they form a vast network of ultra-Orthodox Jewish life that has been expanding steadily since the 1970s. The growth has created friction with existing residents over housing development, school funding, and local zoning regulations. These are real and sensitive matters that affect real people on every side. But the sheer scale of what exists here is staggering. An unincorporated hamlet with no official municipal status, yet with more Jewish institutional density than most major cities anywhere in the world. 100 synagogues in a hamlet where 4 in 10 people speak Yiddish is something most people struggle to believe. But the next town on our list is growing so fast, it may soon become the 3rd largest city in its entire state. And nearly every one of those new residents is Orthodox Jewish. Number 2, Lakewood Township, New Jersey, located in Ocean County. As of the 2020 census, the population stood at 135,158. That was an increase of 45.6% from the 2010 count, which itself had jumped 53.8% from the year 2000. The population essentially doubled in 20 years. It all began in the 1940s when Rabbi Aharon Kotler, one of the most influential Jewish leaders of the 20th century, established Beth Medrash Govoha, a yeshiva and kollel, a center of advanced religious study. By 2016, that institution had grown to serve 25,000 students across 74 affiliated yeshivas. It is one of the largest centers of Jewish learning on the face of the earth. Estimates suggest that by 2018, roughly 2/3 of Lakewood's residents were Orthodox Jews, around 90,000 people. Lakewood is now the 5th largest city in New Jersey. If growth continues at this rate, it could become the 3rd largest by the 2030 census. The birth rate in Lakewood is among the highest in the world for any municipality. Kosher eateries, Judaica stores, and Jewish-run businesses line every major road. The rhythms of Shabbat and Jewish holidays are woven into the identity of this place. Rabbi Kotler's grandson described his grandfather as a revolutionary who believed that traditional Judaism could thrive and flourish in America, a man who was, by any definition, completely countercultural. As with Monsey, the extraordinary growth has created real pressure on infrastructure and neighboring communities. These tensions are honest and deserve acknowledgement. But what has been built here, from a single yeshiva in the 1940s to a city of 135,000, has no parallel in modern demographics anywhere. A township that doubled its population in 20 years is a phenomenon without equal. But our final destination surpasses even Lakewood. It is a place where over 93% of the population is Hasidic Jewish, where Yiddish is nearly the only language spoken, where the median age of residents is just over 11 years old, and where the community was founded by a man who survived the Holocaust and resolved to build a world entirely apart. Number 1. Kiryas Joel sits in Orange County, New York, about 55 miles north of New York City. It was founded in the 1970s by Grand Rebbe Joel Teitelbaum and a group of followers from the Satmar Hasidic movement. They chose this remote wooded location to build a self-reliant community guided entirely by traditional religious values. The village started with roughly 500 people in 1977. By the 2020 census, the population had reached 32,954. The 2023 estimate put that figure at approximately 42,000. That represents a 60% surge between 2010 and 2020, and the population continues to grow. Over 93% of residents speak a language other than English at home. That language is overwhelmingly Yiddish. Only 6.3% report speaking English exclusively. The vast majority belong to the Satmar Hasidic sect, which traces its roots to Satu Mare in Romania and the Hungarian-speaking Jewish world that was devastated during the Holocaust. Kiryas Joel has the youngest median age of any municipality in the entire United States, just 11.4 years old. More than half the residents are under 18, and the streets are filled with children. Because of the village's compact size, residents walk to kosher grocery stores, bakeries, boutiques, yeshivas, and houses of worship. Local charitable organizations such as Tom Chai Shabbos provide essential food packages to families facing hardship, ensuring no one goes hungry during the Jewish holidays. Acts of mutual support are not optional here. They are built into the structure of daily life itself. The village has faced its share of legal and political challenges. In 1994, the United States Supreme Court heard the case concerning the Kiryas Joel Village School District, raising fundamental questions about the separation of religion and government in America. The community's rapid expansion has also generated friction with surrounding municipalities. Scholars of Jewish life note that nowhere outside Israel has there been a community so homogeneous, so uniform, and so thoroughly Hasidic. 18.9% of residents report Hungarian ancestry, the highest of any municipality in America. It is a living thread connecting this village to a world that was nearly destroyed. From 500 people in the 1970s to over 42,000 today, Yiddish, the language that was meant to die in the camps of Europe, is the first language of nearly every child born here. The streets are not filled with silence or ghosts. They are filled with the sound of children. There are more children per square mile here than anywhere else in the United States, and the population is still growing.